By the middle of the 15th century, the city of Constantinople stood as a shadow of what it once had been. For over 1,000 years, it had served as the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, the continuation of Rome after the fall of the West. Its walls had resisted countless sieges, its churches had preserved Christian traditions, and its emperors had claimed the legacy of Caesar. To many, it was not just a city, it was the last living symbol of what people still called Roman. But by 1453, that symbol was fragile. Surrounded by rising powers and weakened from within, Constantinople was no longer the unshakable fortress it had once been. The empire it ruled, often referred to today as the Byzantine Empire, had shrunk dramatically over the centuries. Once stretching across the eastern Mediterranean, it had been reduced to little more than the city itself and a few scattered territories. Economic decline, internal conflicts, and repeated invasions had slowly eroded its strength. The memory of past glory remained, but the reality was different. The population of Constantinople had declined, resources were limited, and the empire's ability to defend itself depended increasingly on diplomacy rather than military power. At the same time, a new force was rising in the region, the Ottoman Empire. Originating in Anatolia, the Ottomans had expanded steadily over the previous centuries, conquering territories in both Asia and Europe. By the early 1400s, they had surrounded Constantinople almost entirely. The city, once the center of a vast empire, had become an island within Ottoman-controlled land. Trade routes were increasingly dominated by the Ottomans, and the Byzantine Empire found itself isolated, dependent on uncertain alliances with Western European powers that were often distracted by their own conflicts. When Mehmed II came to power in 1451, he brought with him a clear ambition to capture Constantinople and make it the capital of his empire. Unlike earlier attempts by other rulers, Mehmed approached the task with careful planning, resources, and determination. He understood both the symbolic and strategic importance of the city. Capturing it would not only secure control over key trade routes between Europe and Asia, but also mark the end of the last remnant of Roman authority. The defenses of Constantinople were still formidable. The Theodosian walls, a series of massive fortifications built centuries earlier, had protected the city from numerous attacks. These walls consisted of multiple layers, moats, outer walls, and inner walls, designed to slow and repel invading forces. For generations, they had been considered nearly impenetrable. But warfare had changed. Gunpowder and cannons were transforming siege tactics, and Mehmed II intended to use this new technology to his advantage. In preparation for the siege, the Ottomans assembled a large army, estimated by some sources to number in the tens of thousands. They also brought massive cannons, including one particularly large bombard, capable of firing enormous stone balls at the city's walls. These cannons represented a shift in military power. What had once been an unbreakable defense was now vulnerable to sustained artillery bombardment. The defenders of Constantinople, led by Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, knew they were facing a new kind of threat. The siege began in April 1453. Day after day, Ottoman cannons pounded the walls, gradually weakening sections that had stood for centuries. The defenders worked tirelessly to repair the damage, reinforcing breaches and holding their positions. Despite their determination, they were vastly outnumbered. The Byzantine forces, supported by a small number of foreign volunteers, lacked the manpower and resources needed to withstand a prolonged siege. Supplies within the city were limited, and hopes for relief from Western Europe faded as no major army arrived to break the encirclement. The Ottomans also controlled the surrounding seas, although the Byzantines managed to block access to the Golden Horn with a massive chain stretched across the harbor. In response, Mehmed executed one of the most daring maneuvers of the siege. He ordered ships to be transported overland, bypassing the chain and launching them into the harbor from the other side. This move allowed Ottoman forces to attack the city from multiple directions, increasing the pressure on the already strained defenders.
Inside Constantinople, the atmosphere grew increasingly desperate. Churches filled with people praying for deliverance. The Hagia Sophia, once the grandest cathedral in Christendom, became a place of final refuge. The population understood that they were witnessing the possible end of an era. For centuries, Constantinople had been seen as the bastion of Christian civilization in the East. Its fall would not just be a military defeat, it would be a symbolic collapse of a 1,000-year-old legacy. On May 29, 1453, the final assault began. Ottoman forces launched a massive coordinated attack on the weakened walls. Waves of soldiers advanced, facing fierce resistance from the defenders. The fighting was intense and chaotic. At a critical moment, a breach in the walls allowed Ottoman troops to enter the city. Once inside, the balance shifted quickly. The defenders, exhausted and outnumbered, could no longer hold their positions. Emperor Constantine XI is said to have fought and died during the final battle, refusing to abandon the city. His death marked the end of the Byzantine imperial line. As Ottoman forces spread through Constantinople, the city fell into their control. According to the customs of the time, the conquering army was allowed to loot the city for a limited period. Many inhabitants were killed or taken captive. The Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, symbolizing the transformation of the city's religious identity. Constantinople was no longer the capital of a Christian empire. It became the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, eventually known as Istanbul. The fall of Constantinople had far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate region. For the Christian world, it was a profound shock. The city that had once stood as the eastern pillar of Christendom was gone. Western European powers, already divided by their own conflicts, were unable to prevent its succumb. The event marked a psychological turning point, reinforcing the sense that a new era had begun. At the same time, the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a major power reshaped the balance of power between East and West. Control of key trade routes shifted, affecting commerce between Europe and Asia. Some historians argue that the fall of Constantinople indirectly encouraged European exploration, as nations sought alternative routes to Asia by sea. This would eventually contribute to the age of exploration and the expansion of European influence across the globe. Culturally, the fall also led to the migration of scholars from the Byzantine world to Western Europe. These scholars brought with them knowledge of Greek texts, philosophy, and classical learning that had been preserved in the East. Their influence played a role in the intellectual movements that would later be associated with the Renaissance. In this way, the end of one empire contributed to the transformation of another part of the world. For the Ottoman Empire, the capture of Constantinople was a defining achievement. It established Mehmed II as a powerful and capable ruler and provided the empire with a strategic and symbolic capital. The city's location between Europe and Asia made it a center of trade, culture, and administration. Over time, it became one of the most important cities in the world once again, but under a different identity and leadership. The phrase "end of Christian Rome" reflects more than just the fall of a city. It represents the conclusion of a long historical continuity that began with the Roman Empire. Although the Western Roman Empire had fallen nearly 1,000 years earlier, Constantinople had preserved its legacy in the East. Its fall in 1453 marked the final chapter of that continuity. The Roman Empire, in its last surviving form, had come to an end. Yet history rarely ends as cleanly as it appears. While Constantinople fell, the cultural and religious traditions it represented did not disappear. Orthodox Christianity continued in other regions.
The idea of Rome as a legacy of law, governance, and culture lived on in various forms. Even within the Ottoman Empire, elements of Byzantine administration and culture were absorbed and adapted. The transition was not simply destruction, it was transformation. The fall of Constantinople stands as one of the most significant turning points in world history. It marks the end of one era and the beginning of another. It shows how even the most powerful cities can decline when faced with changing technologies, shifting political realities, and determined new powers. And it reminds us that history is shaped not only by victories and defeats, but by the long processes that lead to them.